100.1 FM and AM 1020 KDKA. It's Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J. Doc and Krause. Talk, listen, and speak to the region's most influential leaders. This is Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J. Doc and Krause.
Welcome in, everyone, to Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J. Doc and Krause on 100.1 FM and AM 1020 KDKA. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for being here. This is Today in Pittsburgh Labor. The city of Pittsburgh is enduring its first major newspaper strike in 30 years. And that began after the paper's owner, Block Communications, effectively cut Post Gazette production, distribution, and advertising workers from their health care plan by refusing to pay a premium increase. Ed Mooney is District 213 Vice President for the CWA. He joins us here on Today in Pittsburgh Labor. Ed, welcome into Today in Pittsburgh Labor. Thank you for being here. Let's start with the facts outlined so the listening audience, Ed, has a little bit of a history. I know that we're north of 100 days on this strike, but give the audience an overview of where this thing started and bring us up to speed.
Thanks, Krause. So we're well over that now. The strike began on October 6th for the production units, and then we were joined by our guild brothers and sisters after that, once they completed a labor board hearing, which you'll hear more about the favorable decision they received there. So this problem actually began when the contract expired in 2017. Leading into that renegotiation, the company brought back a law firm, King & Ballou, which is notorious for a union-busting law firm, and apparently sold the company a bill of goods, or the company asked for the bill to be sold to them to try to break these unions. When they came in there in the negotiations, in every unit they made proposals that they knew no union could agree with, and we've been in this battle with them since 2017. What precipitated the problem with the healthcare is in 2020 when they imposed a contract on the guild, therefore taking them out of the Teamsters Health and Welfare Plan that all of us were in up until that point. That caused a spike in the healthcare costs for the rest of us. And then the culmination was in October of 2022 when the Teamsters put us out of the fund because the company refused to pay the increase. That was then confirmed by the labor board in the trial that the guild had, by issuing a decision against the company and finding them guilty on all counts of bargaining in bad faith, improperly imposing the contract on them, and directing them to reinstate the guild's contract as well as the Teamster Health and Welfare Benefit Fund.
Yeah, when you put the guild back in the fund, the rest of us go in there as a larger pool. The costs come down. It eliminates the problem we were facing, was precipitated them not paying and them locking us out in the strike. Yeah, we'll get more on that ruling. As you mentioned, Ed, John Schluess, who's the president of the Newspaper Guild, will join us in the next segment. The Post Gazette is owned, as mentioned, by Block Communications. What has been the position of Block Communications, Ed? It doesn't sound to be a favorable one towards the workers. It doesn't sound to be a favorable one towards the current negotiations. Talk about that a little bit.
So apparently the company, the two owners, the Block brothers, John Robinson Block in Pittsburgh and Alan Block in Toledo, Ohio, have allowed these two attorneys to run the process for them, even if they run it into the ground. And that's where we're seeing it now. There's been no engagement by the two owners. We have requested the federal mediators go to the owners and get them directly involved in these negotiations, because left up to the attorneys in the room, there is no negotiation. The position of these attorneys is it's their way or the highway. And as of October 6th, with no health care, the production units took the highway, and our guild brothers and sisters joined us shortly thereafter.
Ed Mooney joining us. He's the vice president, District 213. I want to ask you, Ed, about an altercation that occurred just last weekend, on location. Talk about that, and what details do you know, or better yet, what details can you share about the altercation after it occurred?
So the altercation occurred at a distribution center on Carson Street in Pittsburgh, where a scab driver that the company has employed since the beginning of the strike assaulted two of our picketing members who happen to be members of the Teamsters. And, right now our understanding is the district attorney is looking into those issues and trying to retrieve the video of that incident. For the video we've seen so far, at least that I've seen personally, shows the scab truck driver is the one who initiated the confrontation by striking our picketer first, struck one of them when another one went into a system or to break it up. He then struck that person, and our understanding now is the district attorney's office is looking into that altercation, and we're confident that they will do their job in sorting out the facts there and take whatever action is necessary against the driver and against the Post Gazette. The Post Gazette has been doing this. This is all part of their plan, which is to pit one worker against another, right? This goes all the way back to the old industrialist Jay Gould, who's coined the phrase, what management wants is to hire one half of the working class to kill the other half. So they hired this individual by offering him the promise and the moon and the stars to be a strike breaker. While he's there being the strike breaker, the pressure builds up on that individual to the point where he snaps. He snapped, assaulted two of our picketers, and now the company will step back and point fingers and blame it on somebody else. But the ultimate responsibility for this, for the entire conflict that we're having now, lies squarely at the feet of John Robinson Block and Alan Block and the board of directors of Block Communications. They have engaged these attorneys to orchestrate exactly this reign of terror on their employees for whatever reason, God only knows. Just a week ago or 2 weeks ago, we had two members retire on a picket line, two mailers who retired after 46 years of service each to this newspaper, and they spent their last 140-something days on a picket line. That's what this comes down to. Their blatant disdain for their employees, and it's being carried out in the streets of Pittsburgh in these confrontations.
And let me use the last minute and a half that we have to ask you about the support. A little bit later on in the show, Congressman Chris Deluzio will join us. The mayor of Pittsburgh is supporting the workers who are out on strike. So
the support we're getting throughout the Allegheny County area has been tremendous. The support for the workers, absent the people they've been able to convince to insert themselves into this dispute, everyone else has been favorable. The Labor Council, the Allegheny County Fayette Labor Council, has been tremendous. The politicians in the city of Pittsburgh and the surrounding areas have been fantastic. You'll hear more from Congressman Deluzio later about that. But you couldn't ask for more support than we have. The problem is there is zero interaction with the owners of this company, and somebody needs to bring them to the table and hold them accountable for what they're doing, right? There is absolutely no reason for any of this. They have told us from the beginning they want to transition from a print publication to a digital publication. Well, I'm not an expert on the newspaper industry, but if you want to have a successful digital newspaper, my understanding would be you need to have good quality journalists who are confident in their jobs and want to work there to do the best job. And you already heard, and you'll hear more from my counterpart, John Schluess, after this in the next segment about how they treated the journalists. So the bill of goods they were sold by this law firm, or their thinking, which is clearly backwards, needs to be addressed, and they need to come to the table to resolve this dispute immediately. They have tried everything they could. They're suing the city of Pittsburgh. They're suing the police department. They're using the state government, the federal government. They're threatening Findlay Township out in Clinton, where the production facility is. They will stop at nothing and spend the taxpayers' money having to defend frivolous lawsuits and other things in their pursuit of whatever it is against these workers. So the support we've been getting everywhere has been tremendous, and from the customers who have canceled, from the advertisers who have canceled their advertisements. Now we just need somebody to bring these owners to the table and get them to change their strategy to bring this to a successful conclusion.
We'll try and do it on Today in Pittsburgh Labor. That's Ed Mooney, Vice President, District 213. We'll get to our first commercial break here on 100.1 FM, AM 1020, KDKA.
This is Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J. Doc and Krause.
And welcome back, everyone, to Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J. Doc and Krause. Thank you so much for tuning in on 100.1 FM, AM 1020, KDKA. Special thanks to Ed Mooney, Vice President, District 213, for joining us in that opening segment. As promised, our guest for segment number 2 here on Today in Pittsburgh Labor, John Schluess, is the president of the Newspaper Guild, and he joins us now on Today in Pittsburgh Labor. John, thank you so much, man, for giving us a few minutes today to talk about the strike with the Post-Gazette. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, great to have you. Want to ask you first, John, about a recent labor board decision that Ed Mooney referenced in the opening segment. I'm wondering if you can help the audience with some clarity on the actual decision, what was proposed and what was the actual labor board decision in your favor.
Right. So a couple of years ago, I guess it's 2.5 years ago now, the Post-Gazette management did what companies do when they are trying to break up workers' rights, trying to bust the union, and they bargain in bad faith. And that means they basically show up to the bargaining table. We've got, journalists and other workers who are union on our side of the table, and then the employer shows up on their side of the table, and the employer just doesn't move off their position. So back in 2.5 years ago, the company had been doing this now for 3 years, so from 2017 up to 2020. The company then illegally imposed terms. They said, we're fed up. We're not moving anywhere on bargaining. This is your contract. Enjoy it and live with it. We filed an unfair labor practice charge. You do that with the National Labor Relations Board. And it took about 2 years to get a ruling. First, we got the board to open their eyes and say, yeah, that actually looks like bad faith bargaining and illegally imposed terms. And then just earlier this year, in January, we got a ruling from an administrative law judge that said that the Post-Gazette violated federal law, that they bargained in bad faith, that they actually need to bargain in good faith with the union and restore the previous contract and significantly move on specific issues. So, when the company shows up and says, this is our position, this is our position, this is our position, they've been doing that now for 5 years. The board said, you actually need to move on those positions significantly, and then even file monthly bargaining reports to the board. So that was a huge win for us back in late January, and we wrote about it on our strike publication at unionprogress.com.
John, with that win, I'm listening and consuming this, and I'm saying, well, that win should automatically now put the owners of the Post-Gazette immediately back at the bargaining table to get some closure on this. Am I looking at that wrong?
You, Joe, are a sane person, and probably our listeners out there are sane people as well, and that would be the logical anticipated thought process, that you'd be like, well, we got a ruling from a judge that says we violated federal law, that we're going to owe a lot of money to back pay people, that this has gotten really expensive, and that our lawyers gave us really bad advice. So let's change our strategy and maybe just follow the law and get some different legal advice. Unfortunately, the owners of the Post-Gazette, this is the Block family, aren't logical people, and they would rather spend millions of dollars crushing workers who are just trying to support Pittsburgh with community news through the Post-Gazette website and through the newspaper. And the company would instead rather spend millions of dollars rather than settle for what would be tens of thousands of dollars to restore health insurance that's affordable to all the workers in the production facilities, and to go back to the contract that was negotiated by the workers in the newsroom 3 years ago. So these people are not logical. They would rather spend millions of dollars and waste it, which is just destroying the Post-Gazette. It's a self-inflicted wound, and it's really sad to see.
John Schluess is the president of the Newspaper Guild. Boy, I couldn't agree with that statement more. Joining us here on Today in Pittsburgh Labor, John, we thank you for being here. I want to ask you about your members. Full support from your membership. How are the members holding up? I know in our next segment, Kitsy Higgins is going to join us. Give me your perspective on your members. How are they doing? How are they holding up?
Striking is hard. It's really hard for workers, and it takes a personal toll on people. And so in October when the strike began, I moved from Washington, D.C. out to Pittsburgh to be with our members and to support them in this fight, because it's a righteous fight to make sure that we keep and hold the line so that people can afford to have health insurance, that they can afford to live and work in the city that they're supposed to cover and support in terms of community news. It's been really hard for folks. And so one of the things that we've seen, they get strike benefits from the union, which includes the Teamsters and CWA, right? And the Guild is part of CWA. But they also have expenses kind of beyond that. So their health care is covered through the strike fund, and so are weekly benefits. But, there's costs that happen. We had a member who early in the strike, she had a car. She's a Washington, D.C. Correspondent, and her car window got broken in, and so she had to replace the car window. We had a member recently who had a gas line break in their house, and they didn't have hot water or heat in their home in the middle of winter in Pittsburgh for about a week. And then they have these big bills that they have to face. So we set up a striker fund, which you can support at unionprogress.com/donate, where ordinary people can actually join the fight and send $5, $10, $100, whatever you can afford to actually go to a fund that then goes directly to any striking worker who needs more assistance, which covers rent, mortgage, all kinds of things.
John, last thought, and we only have a minute until we get to move to the break, but give me your thought on and we talked about it with Ed in the opening segment. There was an altercation last weekend at one of the, I think Ed had said it was one of the distribution centers. It's dangerous on the picket line, and the workers are there.
It is. There was an incident, this was, last weekend, where one of the scab truck drivers who delivers, basically the newspapers are printed up by Scab Production by the Butler Eagle up in Butler County, brought down to basically the West End in Pittsburgh and dropped off at the GVP distribution center, which is right on West Carson Street. And so, every couple of times a week on Wednesdays and Saturdays, we go out there, we picket. We show how upset we are that this company continues to basically violate federal law and fight workers. And the scab driver threw a punch, broke a guy's jaw, broke a striker's jaw, and sent him to the hospital. He was still in the hospital this week.
John Schluess, president of the Newspaper Guild, joining us here on Today in Pittsburgh Labor. John, keep fighting. Rally your members. We're a platform for all of your members that are on that line. This is Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J-Doc and Krause. On the other side of the commercial break, we'll talk to one of these striking workers, Kitsy Higgins, back in a moment.
Back to Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J-Doc and Krause.
And welcome back, everyone, to Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J-Doc and Krause, broadcasting to you on 100.1 FM and AM 1020 KDKA, the most trusted source in Pittsburgh for over 100 years. Our conversation today is about the Post Gazette strike that goes back to October 6th, and it is a dispute between the owners of the Post Gazette, Block Communications, and the workers who are part of the CWA and, of course, part of the Teamsters. John Schluess, who was the president of the Newspaper Guild, joined us in the opening or in the second segment. Ed Mooney set the table for us in segment number one. Now I'm glad to welcome Kitsy Higgins to join us on Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J-Doc and Krause. Kitsy, I know you're on the picket line right now, and I want to thank you for taking just a moment to join us. Welcome into Today in Pittsburgh Labor.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having us and bringing this to light for the community. Thank you.
Kitsy, so the listening audience has an understanding of who you are. You're a single mom. You're raising 2 children. You worked at the Post Gazette for how long?
I had just gotten a job a year prior to the strike. I was doing advertising sales and working in the East End, so from New Ken to the Monroeville area.
One of the things John Schluess pointed out, Kitsy, was how challenging and how hard it is to be on the picket line. Talk about that.
If you're talking weather, yeah, that's pretty hard. The weather has been a bit chilly this winter. Looking forward to warmer weather. The picket line and the strike in general, it's just hard to. I could be making more if I was at my job, and it's hard not seeing a company that you work for and that you've really worked at and really worked for not be appreciating you. That's been kind of hard, seeing just where they're at with where they think that they should treat their employees and not seeing that company kind of appreciate their workers has been, I think that's been the hardest. It kind of gives a bad taste of business owners, where so many businesses, they're thrilled to have, employees, and they're thrilled with their work and their work ethics and, want to support them. Unfortunately, our kind of owners, unfortunately look down at us and, aren't treating us how we feel that we could be being treated. So that's been hard.
Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J-Doc and Krause as we broadcast you. J-Doc, I know you wanted to jump in with Kitsy. Go ahead, brother.
First of all, Kitsy, thanks, like Joe said, for joining us. The morale-wise, talk about how it is with yourself and your coworkers.
Morale, I think we're doing really well. We're really upbeat. We know that we just have to keep plugging along. We have to keep standing up. And we know that things will change over time. It might not be as fast as we want it. But we know that with time and with just keep plugging away, having the lawyers stand up for us, doing what they can, we know that things will turn around over time. So, again, cold weather sometimes has us on a little low, but it's for the most part, we're all very confident that this will make changes and that we are making changes, and we know it'll start happening soon. So we're doing our best to stay upbeat.
And having said that, you would started off the interview by saying how long you've worked for the company. How long again?
It was a year that I had started working.
And how long? When did this strike start again?
October 5th.
Okay, so
I think I started work the year before October 3rd. So it was literally 1 year anniversary, and 2 days later, strike. The reason I said that was you've been working for them for a year and on strike for 5 months. So it's been a year and a half total. Yeah,
no question about it. And having said that. It's admirable. Is the general public? What are you getting from the public?
I think it's good. I think newspapers, as we all know, it's not as popular as they once were. So there is some people that either don't know that we're on strike or think it's already been resolved because there's not been that much coverage. So that's kind of the hard part. It would be great to get, just for the city to know, this is still happening and to keep supporting us by removing advertising and not reading their articles or buying their newspapers.
That's why we're here. So we get the word out so the general public knows how important it is to have a major newspaper in a city, such as Pittsburgh. It's actually appalling with what's going on, obviously, with you and your coworkers. If they want to have a quality newspaper or quality writers and quality sales staff, obviously it's important to pay fair wages, benefits, and all those things. So you have our support 100%.
Kitsy, let me ask you. I know sometimes it's hard to speak, and I know J-Doc asked you about, or speak on behalf of others, and I know J-Doc asked you about the morale. But how about from a level of confidence? Do you, as you join us today on Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J-Doc and Krause, do you feel as though the owners of Block Communications will come back to the table, and you feel as though you will ultimately be successful in your efforts?
Yes and yes. Eventually they have to. This isn't going to go away. We're not stopping, and I plan on staying on the line for as long as possible, and I know my coworkers do too. So this isn't going away. You can't just bust a union if people are still on strike. So as long as there's still people on the line and still saying, hey, I'm going to be on strike, this can't go away. And at some point, and however long it takes, it'll get resolved. We don't know when that'll be, but we'll be here when it's happening.
Kitsy Higgins is a employee of the Post Gazette, joining us today, J-Doc, from the picket lines. Kitsy, thank you so much for coming on. As J-Doc mentioned, that's what this platform is here to do. We're here to let the community and the city of Pittsburgh know that you're still fighting, and we'll fight right along with you. Thank you, Kitsy.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, good stuff from Kitsy Higgins, J-Doc. I wish you would have been part of that opening segment with Ed Mooney. John Schluess, as you know, was the president of the Newspaper Guild. He joined us. But on the other side, Congressman Chris Deluzio will wrap it up. This is Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J-Doc and Krause. Back in a moment.
It's Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J-Doc and Krause.
And welcome back, everyone, to Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J-Doc and Krause. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in on 100.1 FM, AM 1020, KDKA. Glad to be able to bring the listening audience the story of the Post Gazette Workers on strike going back to October 6th. Congressman Chris Deluzio, J-Doc, is going to join us for what is our final segment this week. We'll be right back here a week from tonight on KDKA every Sunday night at 11 p.m. Congressman, welcome into Today in Pittsburgh Labor. Thank you for joining us.
You got it. Thanks for having me on.
I want to ask you, sir, and I know J-Doc has a couple of questions as well, but I do want to ask you first just a personal position that you have when you see the battle that the workers are going through, and then we can talk about the recent labor board decision.
Yeah, look, I mean, the workers, the Post Gazette, have been on strike for months. I mean, these guys and gals have been out there standing up for, I mean, the basic thing every worker in this country has earned, some dignity on the job. They've gone more than 15 years without a pay raise. There's been violence on the picket line. It's a disgrace. So I've been supporting those workers and standing with them. I had one of those folks, Hutchie Van Lanningham, at my State of the Union address guest down in Washington a couple months back to take their fight, to the national stage, where I think they need more attention across the country of what's going on here in Western PA.
Do you think, Congressman, that from a national perspective, do you think there's support out there, and will that support help lead to closure?
I hope so, and I think so. I mean, you look at poll after poll, people are finding again how important unions are to some dignity on the job, how important they are to our democracy and to fighting this corporate power that is, squeezing us and hurting us across the country, whether it's, look, I got constituents in Beaver County affected by the derailment of the Norfolk Southern train. We see it with drug prices, you name it, right? People know they're getting ripped off, and They know that unions are a powerful tool for workers to have more to say on the job, not just about pay and benefits, but safety.
Well,
I think that's part of it.
It's interesting, Congressman, because what's on the line here, okay, it's ironic. If you look at the way things are laid out, we just talked to Kitsy, okay, these workers, she's been working for the newspaper for a year, and she's been on strike for 5 months. Okay, yeah. Their conviction is unprecedented. But when you look at what's on the line, this is a major metropolitan area. This is their newspaper. Okay, they can't get any press because the people that are controlling the situation are the people that own it. Talk about that, because they're in jeopardy of losing a major newspaper in a major metropolitan area.
Well, and let me say this. I mean, it's a great newspaper. It's because those folks make it that way. It's their work who does it. And, yeah, that paper shut down daily print a couple years back. They've lost a lot of talent because of how anti-worker they are. And it's a shame because it's a great newspaper, and there are some great journalists and great folks who make that thing run, who would rather be doing their jobs and getting paid for it, but have to fight for some dignity. And it's been a long and tough fight, and that has to do with the owners who refuse to, frankly, meet them in good faith.
Congressman Chris Deluzio joining us on Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J-Doc and Krause. I don't want to run out of time, Congressman, before I do want to ask you about a bill that you recently introduced, the Striking and Locked Out Workers Healthcare Protection Act, which in this particular case was part of, I think, what led to the ultimate walkout back in October. So what's the status on the bill?
Yeah, so we introduced it in the last week or so. Senator Sherrod Brown, Senator Casey, Congresswoman Wild, and me. And look, it's a pretty simple bill. It tells employers you can't rip out health care protection from striking and locked out workers. You can't hold people's health and their families' health hostage to force them to take a worse deal than they would otherwise take. And we're seeing it for the Post Gazette workers who are without health care. We've seen it in other strikes. It's obscene, and I can't believe I have to put up a bill to try to change this, but here we are, and it's something we ought to do.
When you think about the media and as far as health care, okay, hospitals and the media, so much lately have corporate entities have cut corners when it comes to quality of hospital care and also the media. I mean, people have to realize the general public, the conviction of these employees. That woman, Kitsy, who was just on the line, when she hung up, she said, we're not only doing this for ourselves, okay, so we have a quality newspaper for the city of Pittsburgh, but also for future companies and situations just like it, so we can set the example and the standards. We can't let corporate greed win. Your reaction, sir?
No, it's absolutely part of it. I mean, there's a point of view from the owners of this paper, and believe me, they've been friendly to those involved in the insurrection and otherwise. They are not ever going to be critical of corporate power, and I think if they're able to destroy what is a strong and fearsome newsroom who's willing to dig into tough issues, well, then, that's going to change the coverage in Western PA for a generation or more. I think that's a real risk. I think it tells us what is at stake for these workers, not just for themselves and their families and their paycheck, but for the work that they do for our region. We need them asking tough questions. Absolutely. And the quality of the media, like you just mentioned, it makes such a difference. I mean, what's going to end up happening if corporate greed wins is you're not going to have any quality reporters, any quality staff. It's not freedom of the media. Well, and I'll add this too. The owners of the paper here, they bought this Pittsburgh City paper, and the union, one of the unions, and I both have separately sent letters to the Department of Justice asking them to investigate about whether there are antitrust law violations, because I worry about the same ownership group gobbling up and further consolidating our media landscape in Western PA and stifling other points of view that aren't the ones they get to control. So I'm worried about that side of it as well.
Congressman Chris Deluzio joining us here on Today in Pittsburgh Labor. Less than a minute left, but I did want to reference, Congressman, you're working hard, man. You've got a lot going on with the recent derailment. You're working on that. You're on the Veterans Committee, and you have this on your radar. So keep banging and keep working on behalf of the people that put you there, sir.
Well, I intend to, and it's the job. And, look, my constituents in Beaver County affected by the derailment, they're scared, they're mad, they're worried. And if we don't improve rail safety, this is going to come to Western PA and others in Pennsylvania and across this country again and again. So something's got to change, and I'm working to do it in Washington.
Congressman Chris Deluzio wrapping us up today on Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J-Doc and Krause. Chris, thanks a million, man. I appreciate it.
You guys, thanks for having me on.
All right, great stuff. That's going to do it for this edition of Today in Pittsburgh Labor with J-Doc and Krause. On behalf of my partner, J-Doc, and all of our guests today, special thanks to Ed Mooney, District 213 Vice President, John Schluess, President of the Newspaper Guild, Kitsy Higgins, the striking worker who joined us from the picket line, and, of course, the good Congressman Chris Deluzio. I'm Joe Krause. See you next week, everybody.